Every day, you are being pulled into battles you never chose. News cycles demand outrage, social media demands reaction, and people around you demand emotional access to your time, energy, and attention. You are told that staying informed, staying connected, and staying available makes you responsible, intelligent, and socially valuable. But what if this constant engagement is not strengthening you, but quietly draining your power? In a world that profits from your distraction, the rarest and most dangerous skill is selective ignorance. The ability to decide what deserves your focus, and what deserves your silence, is quickly becoming the ultimate form of control. This video will expose the hidden psychology behind distraction, the manipulation behind urgency, and the strategic advantage gained by mastering the art of ignoring. If you want to reclaim your attention, strengthen your influence, and build a mind that cannot be easily controlled, then watch carefully. Because most people will never realize they are being recruited into battles that were designed to weaken them. The philosophy of strategic ignorance begins with a ruthless redefinition of duty. From childhood, individuals are conditioned to believe that being constantly informed, emotionally reactive, and socially available is a moral obligation. Society praises those who engage in every outrage, every trend, and every conversation as responsible and virtuous. However, this conditioning quietly shifts your priorities away from self-mastery toward collective distraction. The art of ignoring demands that you dismantle this illusion and examine duty through a colder, more strategic lens. When duty is analyzed objectively, a disturbing truth begins to surface. Most obligations placed upon your attention are not designed to elevate you but to recruit you. Cultural outrage cycles, workplace drama, and social expectations function as systems that redirect your emotional and mental energy toward maintaining other people's agendas. Strategic ignorance reframes these obligations as negotiable contracts rather than moral imperatives. You must consciously evaluate which obligations genuinely contribute to your advancement, and which silently tax your focus. Your only non-negotiable duty is to your potential, your stability, and your peace of mind. Everything else must earn its place through measurable value. This perspective requires intellectual courage because it challenges deeply ingrained systems of social validation. Many people fear being perceived as disengaged or selfish, but strategic ignorance understands that unlimited accessibility is the fastest route to intellectual exhaustion and deluded ambition. Reacting to every societal alarm feels like engagement, but in reality, it is enlistment into conflicts that rarely produce personal strategic benefit. Each trending outrage or viral controversy becomes a battlefield that consumes your emotional reserves while offering no territory in return. The strategically ignorant individual recognizes that attention is a finite resource that must be deployed deliberately. Choosing not to engage is not apathy, it is strategic desertion from wars that drain your capacity for meaningful conquest. This perspective naturally leads to understanding the economics of attention. Attention is not simply a mental state, it is the foundational currency that converts directly into skill, wealth, relationships, and influence. Every hour of uninterrupted focus compounds into mastery, while every interruption fragments intellectual momentum. When attention is dispersed across trivial inputs, its value weakens in the same way that diluted currency loses purchasing power. Strategic ignorance becomes the fiscal discipline that protects your mental economy. Modern distraction operates as psychological inflation. Social media scrolling, compulsive news consumption, and endless digital engagement increase the volume of mental input while decreasing the depth of meaningful output. The mind becomes flooded with noise that mimics importance but produces little tangible growth. Ignoring unnecessary information acts as a tightening of monetary supply for your consciousness. By restricting exposure to low-value stimuli, you increase the purchasing power of every moment of focused effort. To master this economic framework, you must assume the role of a central bank for your own mind. This involves actively regulating which information is allowed entry into your awareness. Every notification, conversation, and digital headline becomes a request to withdraw attention from your long-term goals. Strategic ignorance teaches you to impose strict interest rates on your focus, demanding high returns from anything that competes for your time. The more selective you become, the more valuable your concentration becomes. One of the most powerful applications of this philosophy is tactical deafness. Tactical deafness is the deliberate practice of allowing criticism, gossip, and provocation to collide with your perception and dissolve without internal engagement. It is not about suppressing emotional reactions, but eliminating the necessity for them. When individuals attempt to provoke you, they rely on predictable emotional responses to maintain leverage. Tactical deafness removes their ability to manipulate your behavior by denying them the reaction they seek. Conflict becomes radically unbalanced when tactical deafness is mastered. Most individuals unconsciously depend on emotional reciprocity during confrontation. They expect their words to create doubt, anger, or defensiveness. When they encounter genuine indifference instead, their strategy collapses. Their attempts at control lose momentum because their influence requires your participation, and your silence removes their stage. This form of indifference is frequently misunderstood as weakness or passivity, but it is the opposite. Tactical deafness demonstrates psychological sovereignty. It signals that your emotional bandwidth is governed by your priorities rather than external pressures. Over time, this absence of reaction conditions others to approach you with greater respect, knowing that trivial provocations will not penetrate your decision-making process. Strategic ignorance also requires cultivating productive blind spots. High-level performance is rarely achieved through universal awareness. It is achieved through ruthless specialization and sustained tunnel vision. The human brain functions most effectively when it directs its full cognitive capacity toward a clearly defined objective. Attempting to remain aware of every opportunity or trend fractures that cognitive energy into ineffective fragments. The world constantly presents alternatives disguised as opportunities. New ventures, trending markets, social invitations, and shifting career paths appear attractive because novelty stimulates curiosity. However, each alternative carries a hidden cost: context switching. Every time your attention shifts between unrelated pursuits, your brain resets its cognitive momentum. Strategic ignorance teaches you to reject even attractive distractions if they divert you from your central trajectory. Mastery demands sustained exposure to a narrow corridor of challenges and refinement. Athletes, artists, and entrepreneurs achieve elite performance by repeatedly confronting the same domain of difficulty until precision emerges. This requires ignoring feedback, advice, and alternative paths that may be valuable in isolation but destructive to long-term specialization. The discipline of selective blindness protects the continuity required for excellence. This selective blindness mirrors predatory focus in nature. A lion pursuing prey cannot afford to chase every movement in its environment. It must temporarily blind itself to irrelevant motion, no matter how stimulating it appears. Humans pursuing ambitious goals must develop similar instincts. Clarity of target automatically generates shadows where irrelevance disappears, allowing focus to operate with maximum efficiency. The art of ignoring also evolves into what can be described as the aesthetics of absence. Reputation is shaped not only by visible actions but by consistent patterns of refusal. The invitations declined, the arguments avoided, and the controversies ignored communicate a message more powerful than verbal declarations. Absence becomes a visible symbol of priority and discipline. Over time, others begin to interpret your selective engagement as a signal of value. Scarcity increases perceived importance in every marketplace, including social dynamics. When your attention is difficult to access, it gains prestige and influence. People begin to approach interactions with greater preparation and respect, understanding that your focus cannot be casually obtained. This scarcity produces a psychological vacuum that attracts authority. Silence during chaotic debates often creates an aura of composure and control. While others exhaust themselves through constant expression, your restraint builds intrigue and perceived intelligence. The absence of reaction becomes a form of communication that suggests confidence, calculation, and emotional independence. Strategic ignorance also protects intuitive clarity. Excessive input overwhelms subconscious pattern recognition, blurring the mind's ability to detect genuine opportunities and threats. By reducing noise, you allow intuition to process information with greater precision. Ignoring trivial data strengthens your ability to detect signals that others overlook due to cognitive overcrowding. Another hidden advantage of strategic ignorance is emotional conservation. Emotional reactions consume neurological energy that could otherwise be invested in creativity and problem solving. When you engage with unnecessary drama, you unintentionally allocate psychological resources toward conflicts that yield no advancement. Ignoring these conflicts preserves emotional stamina for challenges that genuinely shape your future. The practice ultimately reshapes personal identity. You begin to view yourself not as a passive recipient of information but as an active curator of consciousness. Every piece of information that enters your mind must justify its presence through measurable contribution to your goals. This transformation converts your awareness from an open marketplace into a fortified investment portfolio. The art of ignoring culminates in psychological autonomy. By mastering selective engagement, you become resistant to manipulation, distraction, and emotional coercion. Your attention operates as a sovereign resource directed by deliberate intention rather than social pressure. In a world engineered to capture and monetize your focus, the ability to ignore strategically becomes one of the most powerful forms of modern influence and self-possession. The strategic blind spot begins with the uncomfortable acceptance that not all knowledge is power. In fact, most information is interference disguised as relevance. Modern media ecosystems are engineered to manufacture urgency, convincing you that constant awareness equals intelligence. But strategic blindness recognizes that excessive awareness dilutes decisive action. By deliberately selecting categories of information that you refuse to consume, whether it is outrage news cycles, celebrity controversies, or unsolicited opinions, you create a protected corridor for your mental energy. This is not intellectual laziness. It is intellectual triage. You are deciding which information is life support for your goals and which is psychological poison that inflames emotion while starving productivity. When you construct a strategic blind spot, you are also redefining authority. Instead of allowing algorithms, social circles, or news platforms to dictate what deserves your attention, you become the architect of your informational diet. Over time, this creates a rare cognitive advantage. While others are trapped reacting to trends, you develop uninterrupted thought continuity. This allows ideas to mature, strategies to compound, and long-term clarity to replace short-term emotional volatility. Your ignorance becomes a weapon because it shields you from manipulation disguised as awareness. The emotional firewall operates at the moment distraction attempts to bypass your logic and invade your internal stability. Every social provocation, criticism, or emotional bait is designed to trigger impulsive reactions. Most individuals experience these emotional triggers as commands rather than signals. The emotional firewall transforms this relationship by introducing a pause between stimulus and response. You acknowledge the emotional surge without assigning it authority over your behavior. You recognize anger, insecurity, or curiosity as temporary visitors rather than directors of your decisions. Mastering the emotional firewall requires learning to observe emotions without participating in them. When someone attempts to provoke you, your role shifts from participant to analyst. You mentally label the tactic, recognize its intent, and allow it to dissipate without engagement. This neutral observation dismantles manipulation because emotional bait requires reaction to function. Over time, people begin to sense that emotional leverage does not work on you. This produces a reputation of psychological stability that discourages future attempts at control. The agenda audit introduces ruthless clarity into every demand placed upon your attention. Every message, request, controversy, or opportunity carries an invisible beneficiary. The agenda audit trains you to identify that beneficiary before investing your focus. When you ask, "Who benefits from my engagement here?" you expose the power structures behind distraction. Often, the true beneficiaries are advertisers, attention-seeking individuals, corporate interests, or social hierarchies that gain influence through your participation. This audit transforms your relationship with obligation. Many demands on your time present themselves as urgent, moral, or socially required. However, when you reverse engineer their outcomes, you frequently discover that they provide minimal return to your growth or well-being. The agenda audit conditions you to treat attention as an investment portfolio rather than a charitable donation. You begin allocating focus only to opportunities that generate measurable advancement for yourself or the people genuinely aligned with your long-term mission. The default no represents one of the most radical psychological shifts in strategic focus. Most individuals operate with an unconscious default yes, meaning they feel compelled to respond, explain, or participate unless they find a strong reason not to. This reactive baseline leaves their time vulnerable to external control. The default no reverses this vulnerability by making silence and inaction your starting position. Engagement must now justify itself rather than ignoring requiring justification. This shift produces immediate psychological authority. When people realize that your participation must be earned, interactions with you become more deliberate and respectful. The default no also eliminates impulsive commitments that fragment your schedule and drain your mental bandwidth. By requiring strategic reasons to engage, you ensure that every action aligns with your broader trajectory instead of satisfying temporary social pressure. The focused provocation transforms ignoring into an active instrument of influence. Silence and selective attention can destabilize opponents more effectively than confrontation. In negotiations, social dynamics, or competitive environments, individuals rely on feedback loops to evaluate their power. When you deliberately withhold attention, you disrupt their ability to measure your intentions. This uncertainty forces them to reveal more information, overextend their arguments, or attempt increasingly transparent manipulation. Focused provocation uses attention as currency rather than reflex. By granting or withholding engagement strategically, you reshape power dynamics without overt conflict. Opponents often become psychologically unbalanced when their attempts to provoke or persuade are met with calculated indifference. This tactic communicates supreme confidence because it signals that you do not require validation, explanation, or emotional resolution to maintain control of the interaction. The ritual of subtraction acknowledges that focus is preserved not only by what you add to your life but by what you remove. Cognitive clutter accumulates silently through subscriptions, notifications, social feeds, and environmental noise. Over time, this clutter creates background distraction that fractures concentration even when you are not consciously engaging with it. The ritual of subtraction treats distraction as intellectual debt that must be aggressively repaid. This ritual involves scheduled purges of informational noise. You systematically unfollow, unsubscribe, mute, and physically remove sources of trivial stimulation. The process is not performed once but repeated consistently, recognizing that distraction continuously regenerates. Each removal strengthens your cognitive environment, creating a space where deep thinking can occur without constant interruption. Over time, your mind begins to associate your environment with clarity and strategic thought rather than impulsive consumption. The sovereignty narrative represents the internal philosophy that sustains all these practices. Without psychological justification, ignoring can feel socially uncomfortable or morally questionable. The sovereignty narrative reframes selective attention as an act of profound self-respect rather than neglect. It constructs the belief that your focus is a finite, irreplaceable resource that must be protected with the same seriousness as financial or physical assets. This narrative gradually rewires guilt into conviction. Instead of feeling rude for declining distractions, you begin to view uncontrolled accessibility as self-betrayal. The sovereignty narrative establishes your mission, growth, and mental stability as sacred responsibilities. When this belief becomes deeply internalized, strategic ignorance transforms from a technique into an identity. You no longer struggle to ignore distractions because your sense of self is anchored in protecting your attention as the foundation of your future influence. Mastery and autonomy. The truth is, power is not just about what you pursue. It is defined by what you refuse. Every distraction you reject sharpens your focus. Every unnecessary battle you abandon preserves your energy. Every moment of selective silence strengthens your control over your life's direction. The art of ignoring is not about apathy. It is about sovereignty. It is about deciding that your attention is too valuable to be owned by trends, manipulated by outrage, or exhausted by noise. If this video changed the way you see focus, influence, and control, then you are already thinking differently from most people. And if you want to continue mastering psychological strategy, social dynamics, and modern power principles, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Like this video so more people can learn how to take back control of their attention. And share this with someone who is overwhelmed by constant noise and distraction but doesn't yet know why. Your attention is your greatest asset. Guard it carefully. Because the world is competing for it every second.